Hi, gang. It's Cassie Ferguson. For those of you who I don't know, I am your self-appointed Chief Feelings Officer, and I wanted to send out a message to everyone for our faculty meeting this week. If you'd rather read this message, the transcript will be provided as a link. But if you'd rather listen to me talk at you for the next few minutes, then stay tuned. So I was trying to think of a way to be helpful, particularly around this idea of how to cope with the anxiety that all of us are feeling because of, the global pandemic. So I just wrote some stuff down, which actually helped. But I just wanted to share it with all of you because you're my colleagues, you're my teammates, and I care about you all a lot. I think that as an emergency medicine physician, I have always prided myself on being calm in any situation. It certainly helps that I'm a pretty optimistic person. It also helps that I rely on a healthy amount of denial and a large amount of humor as defense mechanisms when things get more difficult, which is probably true of most emergency medicine physicians, if not all physicians everywhere. I have gotten better in the last few years at reaching out to my colleagues and to my friends and to my family for help when it gets to the point where I can't do it by myself. And I'm slowly letting go of my perfectionism, which has happened with maturity. I do have to admit, though, that this whole pandemic thing is challenging every coping mechanism that I have relied on in the past, and in some cases driving me back to the ineffective coping mechanisms. There are days and moments that I spend searching Twitter and then obsessively making meal plans or organizing my kids' closets or looking desperately for some sense of control. Even when I've been on shift in the emergency room, I spend time worrying about things that really wouldn't have much consequence or impact on the care of our patients or even on our own safety as providers because I'm just frankly having a harder and harder time dealing with uncertainty. As you are all very much aware, uncertainty causes all of us as humans a tremendous amount of anxiety. Our primitive brain is always updating our world and making judgments about what's safe and what's not safe. And as a result, we tend to overestimate threats and underestimate our ability to deal with them, really in the name of survival. And when we get information that feels incomplete from institutions or sources that we have typically relied on in the past for direction, our brain tends to fill in what's missing with imagined worst-case scenarios. The emotions that are naturally going to come up for us during times like this, grief and distress and guilt, disbelief, I've felt them sort of roll over me in what feels like sort of giant waves, constant and sometimes kind of overwhelming, and has been said by a very wise meditation teacher, we can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. The first step to that is just to notice what feelings are coming up for you, what thoughts are driving those feelings, and then just name them. This is fear. This is anxiety. This is perfectionism. I also hope that you keep this in mind. It is completely normal to feel anxious. It's normal to feel afraid. In addition to your own safety in the hospital and in the clinics, some of you are parents and have kids at home and are trying to deal with schools and daycares being closed. Some of you have parents or family members who are at risk. Some of you are immunocompromised. Some of you are already dealing with anxiety or depression. And I imagine nearly all of you are worried about what this all means for our world moving forward. You don't have to force yourself to let those worries go. Just see if it's possible to notice them and then just to let them be. If you were already dealing with anxiety, I would encourage you to reach out to your mental health care provider. Return to the tools you've used successfully in the past. Come up with a plan. There are also other pieces of information or resources that I've found that I want to tell you about or talk about. So here are some of those. The first one is to just do something every day. I have found it really helpful just to take steps to remain productive and to avoid feeling paralyzed. Take a few minutes just to think about what's worrying you the most, and then take steps to work on that problem. I've been incredibly worried about infecting my kids and my husband when I come home from the emergency department. So I created a plan that includes showering at work, changing at the hospital, having hand sanitizer in my car, taking off my shoes in the garage, and then washing my scrubs when I get home. I've also, however, had to learn that with anything, the trick is careful enough. If we try and ensure 100% safety, it's possible that we'll get caught up in some kind of unhelpful behaviors. We are all helpers by nature. If you're at home, not working, and you probably feel like you want to help out in some way, but maybe don't know how. There are tons of things that you can do. Consider dropping food off at a neighbor's house. Maybe you're lending your expertise in the medical field to create a one-page summary of all the accurate information about COVID and send to your family members. My kids made a sign for the mail carrier saying thank you. Just doing something gives you a sense of purpose, which I think helps tremendously in a crisis, particularly for people who are used to running in and helping. The other thing that I found helpful is to avoid information overload. If you can limit the amount of news intake to what's actually providing new information or sticking to reliable news sources, this could be tremendously helpful. Research tells us that chronic news followers, people who are tuned in all the time, have elevated fears because it starts to feel like everything is happening right outside their door. Being deliberate and thoughtful about how you use technology and social media can absolutely help too. If you're going to use Twitter, consider using a desktop application called TweetDeck, which limits the numbers of notifications that you would see, gives you more control over what's in your feed. Avoid amplifying information from a social media source that you haven't verified as true, which I know is incredibly difficult, but important. There's a book that I recommend to all of the medical students called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. And his theory is that trying to abstain from technology or social media without a plan for what you're going to do to fill that time is kind of a setup for failure. So my suggestion is to take the time to reflect on what you value most and then choose activities to do that are aligned with those values, and give yourself the opportunity to step away from the technology. The other thing that's been helpful is to maintain a daily routine. I know plenty of people are talking about this. I would urge you to stick with what's worked in the past. Trying to create grand new plans for what your day is going to look like is probably unhelpful. Now that most of my days are at home with my 3 kids, I've committed to get up at my usual time. I shower, which is super helpful. I put on real clothes, or at least yoga pants. And if Perhaps if you go to a religious service regularly, tune into your services online. Our church now has a YouTube channel. If you go to the gym every day, take some time to create a workout routine that gets you up and moving. And then this is important. Within that routine, I'm also really trying to allow for what comes up, which means that I can't hold on to any schedule or plan too tightly. The messaging from MCW and from everywhere else changes rapidly. And change is hardest when we resist it, or when we anticipate that at some point things are going to stop changing. Change was a reality before this pandemic and will remain so. So give yourself a little grace and a little forgiveness when things don't go the way you were hoping. I would also encourage everybody to keep reaching out. Make a special effort to remain connected to whoever is in your community. That community may be your family or your friends or neighbors. It may be work colleagues. Who is it that typically supports you, and who would benefit from your support? Texts are an amazing way to communicate, and I use them to get in touch with people quickly or to share information that's needed. That being said, research also shows that text, especially in group text, we tend to mimic the tone of the first writer, which can lead to like a mob mentality and increased anxiety, or people on that text chain to not really feel like they can share their true feelings. One-on-one phone calls or FaceTime allows you to hear the inflection in other people's voices and respond in an appropriate way. So maybe consider using a text to set up a time to call a friend, or just pick up the phone and call now. I'm always glad when I do. And finally, because I'm a human being, I will tell you that despite knowing and sharing all of this information, I still struggle mightily with everything that's happening right now. In our lifetime, these events are unprecedented. I don't have to tell you that. And if I'm being really honest, I'm finding it difficult to turn to all of these tools, the tools that have sustained me in the past: exercise, sleep, meditation, prayer, because they just seem so small when you compare them to a global pandemic. But I would say that it's precisely this kind of situation that we have to find some sense of meaning, some sense of purpose. I can't be present for others, including my patients, if I'm grounded in fear or distress. So I'm choosing to take care of myself as the highest form of professionalism. I will exercise. I will go to bed on time. I will sit to meditate. I will pray. And when I forget to do these things, when I lose my patience with my kids, when I don't accomplish everything on the list for the day, I will hold myself in the same compassionate space that I would hold a good friend. And 1,000,000 times a day, I will notice that I am feeling afraid or angry or guilty or overwhelmed, and I will do my best to drop these 2 phrases into my thinking to bring me back to the present moment, and then to take the next small step I can. The first is right now, it's like this. This phrase comes from a US-born monk named Ajahn Sumedho. I'm probably pronouncing that incorrectly. But in saying this to myself, I'm saying that I'm not saying that it's okay, or that I'm okay with everything that's happening, but what I aspire to in saying this to myself is to accept that right now it just feels like this. That it's possible to coexist with it all without believing that it will always be like this. The second phrase is this useful? This is from a meditation teacher named Joseph Goldstein. The point here is that it's, of course, okay to grapple with stresses in life and to worry and to plan, but only up until the point that it's useful. There comes a time when the thoughts that are coming up for us, the emotions that are coming up from us, that they just no longer drive useful action, but really are only serving to cause more stress. So on the 10th time that I am worrying about whether I should disinfect the house again, I have to say to myself, is this useful? Being mindful of this point where worrying stops being useful can free up your brain, frankly, for more important things. The privilege that we have as physicians is that we are the helpers. We run in when others cannot. It is in the doing and the caring and the helping that we will find our strength and our motivation. You are welcome to reach out to me via text or phone or email. I'd love to hear from you. I've also compiled information about employee assistance program and a ton of other resources that I found useful. And those will be included with this video link and email from the department. So as we move into the next hour and the next day and the next week, let's choose to ground ourselves in love and in compassion. I'm thinking about all of you and hoping you are safe and well.